This cup of tea, beloved by billions of people all over the world, tells a captivating tale of arts and culture, history and trade, revolution, and a forgotten case of corporate espionage. Our story exemplifies real life is stranger than fiction. Welcome to the adventure of tea, the drink that changed the world. Crowned the mother of world's gardens, China has more plant species and botanical variety than any other temperate country. Her wide range of latitudes offer nearly every form of landscape. Some are found nowhere else on Earth. Of the 32,000 species of vascular plants discovered so far, none shook up the world quite like this one. Camellia sinensis, or tea. The scientific name literally means Chinese tea. Throughout time, this simple plant immortalized kingdoms near and far, ignited wars, brought peace, and shaped world history. Over the millennia, China invented all 6 types of tea: white, yellow, green, oolong, black, and of course, pu'er. Up until the mid-19th century, China was the only country on Earth that knew how to make tea. From cultivation, to manufacturing, to tasting. And the Celestial Kingdom guarded her national beverage as a state treasure. So what happened to the ancient Chinese tea secret? How did this rooted one come to propagate on foreign land oceans away? And how did tea spread around the world and become the favorite drink after water? To unearth the centuries-old mystery, we embark on a mystical journey deep into the fairy land of tea.
Wuyishan 这个地方，好山好水，出了一颗特殊的好茶。
Wuyishan 是茶水浸润了几千年的一个地方，每个人的骨髓里都有那么一丝的茶味。
Wuyishan 的每个山头啊都有灵气的，那是水的，每个地方的水也有灵气。
Wuyi was known as the great tea growing district. Tea is traditionally a social gathering. It's what lubricates the world. It brings people together. It's a cup of humanity.
茶的文化在Wuyishan代表着中国茶文化的一个传承。Wuyishan是乌龙茶和红茶的发源地。
正山小种红茶是世界红茶的鼻祖，这个茶影响了世界。
For the tea lovers who cherish their oolong or black teas, like Earl Grey and English breakfast, the origin of your favorite cuppa traces back to the mystical mountains of Wuyi. Located in China's Fujian province, 400 miles southwest of Shanghai, the legendary Wuyishan produced teas that brought epic, far-reaching impact the world over. A land with abundant folklore, the classic romantic fable of the Maiden Rock. And the Emperor's Peak had captivated the hearts and minds of people for generations. Anchored by her signature rock formation, known as Danxia Landform, Wuyishan is the story of a pot of tea, steeped for thousands of years and never told before now. Hong Kong, an island whose fate had been intertwined with the tea trade between two mighty empires, the Celestial Kingdom of China and the colonial powerhouse of Great Britain. Held here is the third and final auction of the celebrated Hong Pao, King of Wuyi Rock Tea. "20 grams of precious tea, the final harvest from the legendary Hong Pao mother trees. Grown in the Wuyi Mountains of Fujian province in China. every tea leaf is worth its weight in gold. In fact, 75 times over. What makes Da Hong Pao, king of Wuyi rock tea, the most prized tea in the world?
茶是另一种世界。
Ancient legend told the story of the 9 dragons, wreaking havoc in Wuyishan. The mighty beasts destroyed crops and ruined lives. An immortal came to the rescue, waging a battle against the menacing dragons. The forces of light and darkness collided in a vortex of clouds. Thunder and lightning erupted. At long last, the divine warrior triumphed, reining in the 9 dragons one by one and turning them into giant stones. From then on, this place became known as 九龙科, nest of the 9 dragons. To commemorate his victory, the immortal left a gift: 3 celestial tea trees clinging to the face of a giant cliff, deep inside the nest. It is said the trees emitted a red light, as if reflecting a perpetual sunset. An abbot discovered the glowing tea trees and sent his pet monkey to pick the leaves, since human hands could harm the tree spirit. Returning to the temple, the monk boiled the leaves for an ill scholar who was unable to travel to the capital for the imperial examination. In ancient China, the civil exam system was the rite of passage for scholars to become government officials, bringing honor to the family name. Healed by the tea, the young man journeyed on and became a Zhuangyuan, top scholar of the land. In gratitude, the royal scholar returned to the temple to thank the monk and draped his imperial red robe onto the fabled tea trees. The local people called the trees Da Hong Pao, big red robe. The Buddhist monastery, Tianxing Miao, Temple of Heaven Heart, earned the nickname Mother Temple. Established in the Tang Dynasty more than 2,000 years ago, Tianxing Miao is the largest amongst the hundreds of temples strewn throughout the sacred land.
武夷山这个地方，儒释道三教能聚集在桌子上品杯茶，这就是因为茶的魅力。
It's said that monks first started cultivating tea in ancient China.
茶生长得好，但是做工也还要好。
The hard work of tea making is a path to spiritual enlightenment. Over the centuries, The monks at the Mother Temple invented a wide collection of exquisite teas, so fine they were offered as tribute teas throughout successive dynasties. Tea was Zen.
"禅"跟"茶"在我内心当中理解成一个字“静”，安静的静。
Since the ancient time, the monks practiced the Zen tea ceremony, also known as Gong Fu Cha, a ritual of tranquility through tea. Gong Fu is an all-encompassing term to convey expertise and hard work to master a skill, rather than just martial arts as understood in the West. Buddhist monks practiced the art of Gong Fu, or as Westerners say, Kung Fu, as a means of physical and mental discipline. This ancient Zen tea ceremony is still in practice today. Up until 2007, the mother trees were harvested once a year, yielding fewer than 500 grams of tea, a little over 1 pound. Historically, this tea was never for sale, but it was offered as gifts to heads of state, foreign dignitaries, and spiritual leaders.
茶，它是中国的国饮，茶和天下。
大红袍 became the most revered tea in China. So how did tea originate? Tea is China's venerable antiquity, an integral part of her civilization.
中国人的茶渊源很长，几千年来，茶是一个和谐的物产。
Tea is so ancient that it brews a mythical origin in China. Over 5,000 years ago, a divine emperor named Shenlong discovered tea growing in the wild. He then boiled them into a tonic and used it as medicine. The oldest tea plants grew in China's southwestern provinces of Yunnan and Sichuan, home of Pu'er, where tea drinking dates back to the Han Dynasty. Considered a southerner's drink initially, tea became popular within those regions, where the tea plants grew abundantly in mild, warm climates. The earliest record dated Wuyi rock tea more than 2,000 years ago, with ancient teaware excavated from the tomb of a local king. A Song Dynasty poem entitled Fine Leaves Chronicle by Shu Dongbo depicted the king tasting tea, a popular activity in the region.
这个地方自古以来产茶，我生长在茶叶世家，传承到我的手上24代。
Tea remained a local specialty until the Grand Canal was completed in the early 7th century, connecting the southern regions with the capital in northern China. Tea spread from the monks to the literati and the elite, then rapidly filtered down to the general populace. By the Tang Dynasty, tea culture flourished into the golden era. Tea became China's national drink more than 1,000 years ago. Over 400 poems sprung up, and Wuyi rock tea played a starring role in arts and literature. The most famous Seven Cup by Lu Tong immortalized Wuyi tea, known as rock's milk, for its long-lasting 7 brews, each with subtle changes in taste and sensation.
由于它生长环境的优越性，以及制作工艺的精湛，所以武夷人茶呢，在历史以来就是我们中国的10大名茶。
The stream of the 9 windings flowed the far-famed Wuyi rock tea to Japan, Russia, Arabia, and beyond. The Chinese character cha was adopted as the national standard word for tea. The pictograph means people amongst trees. The great tea sage, Lu Yu, published the world's first book on tea in the year 780. In his lifelong work, Cha Jing, Classic of Tea, Lu Yu promoted tea connoisseurship, from cultivation to processing, from brewing to tasting. Lu Yu despised the Tang custom of making tea soup, using roasted ground-up dry tea from cake form and cooking it with ginger, scallions, and citrus peel. The patron saint of tea introduced Cha Dao, the way of tea, and the sacred nature of water, teaware, and utensils to properly serve tea. Lu Yu brought etiquette, sophistication, and a spirit to tea. Tea things and porcelain appeared widely in China around the 7th and 8th centuries. Tea drinking got fancy. A living art form, tea came to symbolize China. The arrival of Song Dynasty brought new fame to Wuyishan, not only for her tea, but also for her tea things. Fujian's blue and black glazed tea bowls became highly coveted throughout Asia. Marked by the signature hare's fur, the bowls are called timoko ware in Japan. Treasured as collection items, they came in sets of 10. Each cup painted and poetically inscribed with a verse from the famed poem Song of the Nine-Turned Stream by eminent poet Zhu Xi of the early 12th century. Produced in Wuyishan's Yuling Ting, the ancient kiln covered nearly 60,000 square meters, or 10 football fields. Built in 1000 AD, this is one of the longest dragon kilns in China from the Song Dynasty. Spanning across 6 hills, one of the kilns could bake 80,000 pieces per firing. Today, only 5% of this ancient site has been excavated. Starting in the 10th century, whipped tea became fashionable in China. Still in cake form, tea was ground up, the powder infused in hot water and whipped with a bamboo whisk. The national drink was stirred into a frothy new height. Wuyi rock tea rose to prominence.
从宋朝的时候开始，武夷岩茶就是作为皇宫的贡茶。
The custom of gong cha, or tribute tea for emperors, dates back to the 2nd century. In Wuyishan, tea whipped up a new form of entertainment. To compete for the frothiest brew, local people held tea battles in homes and villages. This Song tradition became today's annual tea tournament, a citywide festival to compete for the title King of Tea. Tea was a milky drink with a head of foam. An ancient form of tea latte was served in the streets of China. That was over 1,000 years ago. Japan adopted whipped tea as matcha, using tea bowls and combining Luyu's cha dao. This became the Japanese tea ceremony. Cha no yu, meaning the way of tea in the early 1500s, and continues today. Japan also adopted the word cha, the Cantonese pronunciation for tea, similar to the Portuguese. While the Dutch, the British, and the French adopted de, tea in local Fujian dialect, where early tea trade began. Around the world today, tea is called a variation of either cha or de.
元代的时候，武夷山就设立了御茶园、贡茶制茶场所。
Up until the end of the Yuan Dynasty, all of the teas in China were in cake form. The dawn of the Ming Dynasty brought an exciting breakthrough for tea. In 1391, the founding Ming Emperor, Hongwu, decreed that compressed tea cakes were no longer accepted as tribute teas. Loose teas were the new best teas. Steeping became the method of tea drinking. Fancy teapots joined the cadre of fancy tea things. The early 1500s brought popularity to using teapots in China. A century later, they would brew a new craze in Europe known as wukaroware. The technique of adding overglazed pigments on porcelain was perfected in China during the Ming Dynasty, adding vibrant colors to tea things. The West would develop teapot envy 2 centuries later. To maintain the freshness of the tea leaves, tea caddies were invented. They became the new darlings of Chinese tea things. In Wuyishan, tea innovation reached the pinnacle at the Mother Temple. In 1646, the monks created a brand new category, Oolong, a semi-fermented tea. The reputation for Wuyi rock tea soared near and far. In 1727, the Treaty of Kyakhta between the Qing and the Russian empires transformed the stream of the Nine Windings into a super tea waterway.
我们的万里茶道从我们Wuyishan的夏梅为起点，到了恰克图历经5000多公里，形成了我们最早的中国茶走向欧洲市场的一条大通道。
The far-famed Da Hong Pao became the symbol for Wuyi rock tea, or Wuyi Oolong tea. Oolong spread spiritually to Taiwan. In 1855, the monk Lin Fengqi brought 36 Wuyi tea plants upon returning home from the Mother Temple, giving birth to the famous Dongding Oolong in Taiwan. There's a Chinese saying, 山高, 木多, 出好茶, high mountain, heavy mist, produce good tea. Situated along China's Greenbelt region, Wuyishan is coveted for her pristine environment and rich biodiversity. Similar to wine, tea is all about terroir. Wuyi rock tea is famous for its signature characteristic, known as Yanyun, or rock terroir.
"最好的茶，它首先第一点是要讲它的生长地理环境，要生长的最好的地方。然后植被要好，水要好。第三，我们讲就在山根鸡叫的时候都听不到声音的地方，这种茶它就像一个修行的老人一样，在那里修行。
Wuyishan它是典型的丹霞地貌，形成了一些的坑涧。坑涧的地形呢，形成了阳光不是直射到茶树上，形成了一些漫射光的小气候。
大红袍是Wuyishan10大名宠之一，灌木型的。我大红袍是中叶种，因为苗是靠扦插的。真正的大红袍是桂花香。
其实Wuyishan有800多个品种的茶，在这个茶的过程中，同样的制作工艺，它做出来味道它是有差别的，所以它很特别。
Wuyishan makes 2 types of tea, black and oolong. The most famous oolong varietal is 大红袍。
这个乌龙茶呢，发酵了3分红7分绿，既有红茶的特点，又有绿茶的特点。
The art of Oolong tea making includes picking, processing, and inspecting.
我是11代是做茶的我16岁就开始做茶了。首先第一个是采茶，茶要采得好。
Picking causes stress on the plant. A tea master, Shifu, knows the timing to commence harvest. In Wuyishan, the most prized teas grow in rocks and inside the scenic area, covering 72 square kilometers or 18,000 acres. Here, tea is hand-picked once a year, around mid-April, by plucking 2 leaves below the bud. Outside this prime area, tea is picked twice a year. A seasoned hand plucks up to 50 kilograms of leaves a day, or 110 pounds, yielding about 10 pounds of tea for sale.
人要解读到这颗茶，知道它生长的这位置，我们应该怎样用什么样的方法来采摘它、爱护它、制作它。
The gathering of leaves triggers a series of non-stop interlocking steps. Oolong is the most complex in all of tea making.
倒青、抖水、调青。
The Shik green process bruises the edges of the leaves and triggers oxidation. Wuyi rock tea's unique characteristic, green leaves, red edges, comes from this step. It looks easy and fun, but it is difficult to master.
有经验的师傅，他就知道这个茶什么时候要扫了。
It is believed tea making is a discipline for the tea leaves, as well as for the tea master.
那做茶人他一辈子也是无止境。
Called Kyo green or stir green, this replaces the steam green technique from previous dynasties, giving tea its loose form. Wok frying helps the leaves develop more aromas and deactivates the enzyme that causes them to turn brown, fixing their green color. The key is to avoid burning one's fingers. The wok is more than 220 degrees Celsius, or 420 degrees Fahrenheit. Lu Yu ascribed the tea spirit to the art of tea making, infusing the virtue of the leaf with its maker. Traditional values such as hard work, respect, and sacrifice are imbued into tea.
茶要做好，那人的心态要好，人品要好，人品好了才做得到好茶。揉成型，关键的就是积实，找了水走掉。 这样子才能够保护一泡茶的完整。
The essence of the tea leaves is distilled through the diligent hands of a tea maker.
父亲那一代人，他做茶是为了生活，但我们这一代人是为了梦想跟情怀在做茶的。
Tea masters inspect tea at every stage, tracing the fragrance, tasting the texture, examining the leaves. Inspection is an art form.
我们前辈做茶从到现在，它是环环都重要。小心加小心，马虎不得。学到老，做到老。
我们的制茶技艺是从父传子，或者是师傅传徒弟。每个人都会有他自己的心得，而且我们制茶技艺是一代一代传承。
刚才我那个审评就是能喝出它等级来的，就这泡茶通过我这种啜茶的方式，在舌尖上翻滚，滋味、香型、级别、优点、缺点，在我这种喝的过程中，它都在我的舌面上体现出来了。
The celebrated Wuyi rock tea came with all the bells and whistles of an ancient tea ritual. The Gong Fu cha ceremony leads the connoisseurs on a tasting journey. These steps can vary depending on local customs.
第一道我们是粉点檀香，因为茶是静的嘛。我们让在座的人静下来。第二道叶家稠冰，展示我们今天要泡的茶。第三道就是乌龙入宫，然后剥茶叶。
The name Oolong literally means black dragons in Chinese. Using fresh spring water is key. To brew the best oolong, the water is brought to a full boil.
温炭茶壶。乌龙入海是希望滋润茶叶，然后把第一道茶汤注入茶海。
First, the tea leaves are awakened. This brew is for your enemy, of course.
后来就是著名的高山流水。 开始洗杯，因为让茶先焖在一起。关公巡城韩信点兵，这是对来宾的一种尊重。
Chinese drink tea pure, without adding sugar, milk, or cream.
掌式端杯的拿法，喜闻幽香，闻香然后鉴赏汤色。最后就是敬杯谢茶。
Wuyishan茶叶当中，岩谷花香。
在品这口茶的时候啊，我们的舌苔，它就像Wuyishan的丹霞地貌的沙砾的岩石，颗粒状的，经过几亿年的风化成颗粒的沙土。喝进去，胎上就是好像有跳跃的那种生津的汤水的那种感觉。它岩石上所渗透出来的水，我觉得就是它的岩谷里面所渗透出来的这种汁。真正的品茶的时候，它是3个口，它不超过3个人。这3个人都很爱茶，也很懂茶。喝到一口最好的茶的时候，大家只是微微一笑，点点头，已经不说话了。这就是达到茶的最高境界。
Some of my favorite experiences with tea in the world, drinking tea with the tea makers. And even if I can't speak the language, when we as tea people come together, we can share a cup of tea and immediately we are communicating with each other. We don't have to speak a language because we are speaking the language of tea.
我们做茶人，首先是讲到今天喝的这一杯茶不太容易，来的不太容易，珍惜每一杯茶，珍惜每一口茶。
Around the mid-1500s, in a village deep in the misty mountains, an accidental invention rocketed Wuyishan onto the world stage and brought a gold rush for Chinese tea and set hearts on fire.
这杯茶做了24代，大概在450多年前，一个偶然的机会下，我的祖先发现山上采下来的茶青的原料已经变坏了，实际上它是发酵了，不是变坏了。当时不知道，就给这个茶放到锅里去炒、去揉，就烘焙一干燥，黑黑的颜色，泡在杯里面呢，红红的汤。
Historically, Wuyi rock tea had been prized for its translucent quality and goldish color. Between the dark tea soup and the smoky aroma, this was undesirable to Chinese drinkers.
心里想，这下坏了，那怎么办？就给这个茶 托山外的朋友拿到沿海去卖。那沿海的商人给这个茶，就通过荷兰人、葡萄牙人给这个茶就带到了欧洲。
Trading through its colony in Macau, Portuguese seafarers were the first to bring back tea to Europe in the mid-1500s.
来年春天，这个商人找到我的祖先，说：“你那个茶非常 OK， 你今年再帮我做点，我给你双倍的价格。”那从此以后，这个地方就开始做这种发酵的茶。就越做越多，越做越好。
This surprise hit created an unexpected demand, and many tea makers switched to making black tea and quickly mastered the trade. Luckily, it was a lot easier to make than Oolong.
那呢，这个茶呢，在海外呢，就越来越受人喜欢。
When Portugal's Princess Catherine of Braganza took her first sip of Wuyi tea in her palace, tea had been China's national drink for more than 1,000 years. Organized European tea trade began. In 1600, Queen Elizabeth of England chartered the East India Company, granting it a complete monopoly on English trade with Asia. But the tea trade was dominated by the Dutch East India Company, the world's first publicly listed company in 1602. The Dutch imported Europe's first tea in 1610 through Java, its colony in Indonesia.
But the very first tea in America happened in 1647, even before they had tea in London. The Dutch East India Company was bringing tea into what is Lower Manhattan because Peter Stuyvesant was the new governor of that Dutch colony there. And with him, he brought tea a full 11 years before there was an advertisement for tea in London.
Initially, tea was sold through pharmacies as medicine in Europe.
The tea that came in the mid-1600s was very, very expensive and could only be afforded by the most wealthy people.
Even though Europeans were enamored with the drink, tea was shrouded in mystery.
那贸易商不知道这个茶叫什么，我们当地人告诉他，我们叫乌达，乌达就是黑色的意思。
Somehow, the word Wuyi became Wuyi. And I often say it's because sailors, as they made their trip from Canton to London, drank a lot of rum.
Along the southern coast of China, Canton played a significant role in the tea trade. It became China's only trading port with Westerners in 1757, when the emperor sealed all other ports in response to a British attempt to expand trade deeper into China.
As they got to London, they forgot that it was Wuyi, and somehow it became Boohee, a little tipsy. So that's how the name Bohea became the common term for it, black tea.
In Europe, England joined the Tea Party relatively late. When King Charles II married the tea-loving princess, Catherine of Braganza, in 1662, tea's popularity began to grow.
So with her dowry as she came to London, she brought with her some tea. Tea became quite the fashion. Problem being that it was only the Dutch East India Company that was bringing tea over. So in order for the British East India Company to give the new bride a gift, they had to go to the Dutch East India Company to buy their tea, which is very humiliating.
In 1669, without direct access to China, the British East India Company imported its first Chinese tea through Java. The order was for 140 pounds of tea. 15 years later, the company was finally granted a trading post alongside other foreigners in Canton. By 1730, over 1 million pounds of Chinese tea were imported. Tea took the British Empire by storm. Along with all the Chinese tea things.
The very first teacups that came to London had no handles. They were of course, Chinese teacups. And so everyone who would have their family portrait made in the 1700s would bring out all the tea things. And so you had these very fine ladies in London holding their teacups just like this. And that became not just balance, that's being a show-off.
Queen Catherine not only popularized tea in England, but also the fate of tea was literally held in her pinky up hand. Part of the Queen's marriage contract transferred to England the 7 islands of Bombay, which Charles II leased to the East India Company in 1668, setting the stage to brew epic change for tea. By 1750, tea had become the most popular drink throughout Britain, outselling even beer. The English addiction to the divine beverage proved to have powerful consequences all over the world. On the other side of the Atlantic, the American colonies grew equally thirsty for tea.
Tea culture had two sides. There was the social side and the political side. Socially, Americans were crazy about tea. Over 1 million pots of tea a day were boiled in the American colonies.
We had every household that could afford it would have the ritual of tea, because the sweetest thing you can put into tea is gossip.
Chinese tea became a symbol of sophistication. Exquisite Chinese porcelain, like the classic blue and white and those made in Qingdezhen, inspired the start of the European porcelain industry. Meissen in Germany in 1710, followed by Sèvres in France, Minton in England, and many more. And tea things sprouted from around the world in every shape, size, and color. Beginning in the 17th century, the China brand whipped up a frenzy in the West and started a trend that lasted 2 centuries, known as chinoiserie.
Any well-respected man, if he was not married, had to have a tea set in order to attract a suitable wife. So our very first president, George Washington, sent off a request to China to have a set of tea things made for him.
By 1764, tea was the third most valuable import for the British.
The American colonies, we were completely controlled by the British government. There had to be taxes levied, to the point where George III said, tax the ladies of Boston whatever you want. They will never give it up.
In response to protests, the British Parliament abolished all import duties in 1770, except for the most important, the tea tax. 3 years later, on May 10, 1773, the Tea Act granted the East India Company a monopoly on tea sales.
It pretty much was the straw that broke the camel's back.
We were smuggling in Dutch tea to avoid having to pay for the taxed East India tea.
So on December 16, 1773, Bostonians were assembled here, trying to decide what to do about the tea that was aboard the 3 ships in Boston Harbor. Several of the men assembled decided they would take this into their own hands. And thus was launched that evening, what we know now as the Boston Tea Party.
340 chests of East India Company tea were destroyed in Boston Harbor. There was Bohea, Conju, and Souchong were the black teas, and then Singlo and Hyson were the 2 green teas.
Every chest of tea came from China. 2/3 were from Wuyishan.
In 18th century currency, that was about 10,000 pounds sterling. Today, that would be about $1.5 million in American currency. It was a very, very expensive loss to the East India Company, and it was quite the shock to the English Treasury as well.
The Robinson's tea chest, made in Canton, is the last surviving artifact from this momentous event.
234箱包黑武夷茶倒到海里面去，影响了英国，影响了世界，政商小种红茶，引发了美国的独立战争。
By the mid-1800s, tea had become a staple of British life. Tea import from China reached 42 million kilograms, or 93 million pounds in 1855. To be English was to drink tea, morning, noon, and night. Its high margins made tea the most valuable import, equal to all other Chinese goods combined. The multi-billion-pound industry made tea a profit center for the British government. Tea alone generated 10% of annual tax revenue. The British Empire was running on tea.
The golden years of afternoon tea in London were in the mid-1800s, as the time for women to get together in their boudoir often. Then it moved into the hotels of London. And that eventually gave way to what we know now, as we see all over the world, traditional English afternoon tea. And it was a completely unnecessary meal in the middle of the afternoon.
Tea became high fashion in England. Chinese tea became the empire drink for the British. Demand for new season's teas was so great that tea clippers competed in bringing fresh teas from China back to England. The first vessel home could command a premium of at least 10% for her cargoes. The Great Tea Race of 1866 pitted 16 tea clippers in the competition. Starting from Fuzhou's pagoda anchorage to England. After 99 days and crossing 16,000 miles of open ocean, 2 clippers sailed for London docks on the same tide. Taiping, carrying 1.1 million pounds of tea, docked 28 minutes earlier than her arch-rival, Ariel. It was a maritime spectacle. More than 2 centuries of tea drinking were draining away the queen's coffers because China only wanted silver for her liquid jade. To overcome the silver shortage, the East India Company invented a trade triangle. Export English goods to India. Use the proceeds to buy opium there, then smuggle the drug into China. In exchange for her beloved tea. For long-term supply, England would need to grow her empire tea in India. Using smuggled tea seeds from China, the East India Company ran experimental tea gardens in Assam and the Himalayas. Indian teas yielded inferior quality, as locals had no knowledge of tea manufacturing. The natives chewed the tea leaves instead of brewing them. Indigenous Assam stock was of poor quality.
The great secret that China kept for centuries was how tea was made. We in the West had no idea because we were not allowed to go into the country and see tea being grown, much less tea being made.
Tea was such an enigma that in 1772, the eminent Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus misclassified black and green teas as being 2 different plants. Even though tea was still a mystery, it became clear extreme measures were needed if England wanted to fill her teacup with fine teas grown in India. Eventually, the British smuggling of opium for tea trade exploded into the First Opium War in 1839. England's gunboat diplomacy led to the Treaty of Nanking, ending the 3-year war. Among other conditions, China ceded the island of Hong Kong to the British and opened up 4 new trading ports in addition to Canton. This crack of opening cast a ray of hope to germinate an old seed. To make Indian tea a success, the East India Company would need to hack the ancient Chinese tea secret. The mission called for a spy, a plant hunter, a tea raider. A man aptly named Robert Fortune.
This is the land of tea, a beverage which in the eyes of Englishmen is enough to immortalize any country.
The 33-year-old Scotsman was no stranger to China's botanical bounty, for he had previously completed a plant hunting trip for the Horticulture Society of London. On that trip, Fortune solved the centuries-old mystery of tea for England. He proved black and green teas came from the same plant. The difference was due to processing technique.
I was deputed by the East India Company to proceed to China for the purpose of obtaining the finest varieties of the tea plant, as well as native manufacturers for the government tea plantations in the Himalayas.
The company paid Fortune £500 per annum for 3 years, quadrupling his salary at the time. Industrial espionage was dangerous. To further entice Fortune, the company sweetened its offer. Anything he brought back from China, other than tea, was his to profit.
On the 14th of August 1848, the Peninsular and Oriental Company's steamship Braganza dropped her anchor in the Bay of Hong Kong.
Fortune traveled north to Shanghai, used it as his base, and made his way to the finest black and green tea districts through rivers and canals.
As I went far inland, my object in coming thus far north was to obtain seeds and plants of the tea shrub.
To infiltrate inland beyond the treaty ports, the tea spy took on a disguise.
My servants now procured me a Chinese dress and had the tail which I had worn in former years nicely dressed by the barber.
Posing as a high-level official from Tartary outside the Great Wall, the acting Chinaman spoke pidgin Chinese and hired Chinese servants who became his mouth and ears. After a failed attempt, Fortune was determined to get to the heart of tea.
I did not like the idea of returning to Europe without being perfectly certain that I had introduced the tea plant from the best black tea districts of China. There may also have been a lingering desire to cross the Wuyi Mountains and to visit the far-famed Wuyishan. The stream of 9 windings divides the range into the north and south. The North Range is said to produce the best teas. Here the finest souchongs and picos are produced.
Fortune did his homework. The finest souchongs come from this pristine region, covering more than 500 square kilometers or 140,000 acres. This nature preserve boasts the world's largest and the most complete biodiverse ecosystem at the same latitude. Like countless travelers before him, the man of science was bewitched by the fabled Wuyishan.
The strange rocks, as they reared their rugged forms high above the temples, had a curious and unnatural presence. Was it a reality or a dream? Or was I in some fair land, and fancy seemed inclined to convert the rocks and trees into strange living forms?
Fortune befriended the kind monks, using the temples as his base to collect tea plants and seeds.
I visited many of the tea farms and was successful in procuring about 400 young plants.
In Wuyishan, the undercover spy gathered intelligence on all things pertaining to tea.
On black tea, when the leaves are brought in from the plantations, they are spread out thinly on flat bamboo trays. When they become flaccid, they are thrown in heaps. The next part of the process is exactly the same as the manipulation of green tea.
Unbeknownst to the tea spy, he had hacked the secret of Oolong and green teas. Black tea, however, was still shrouded in mystery. To poach tea masters, he hired a middleman. After securing ample seeds and plants, Fortune had to solve a vexing puzzle: how to keep them alive through the long ocean voyage, exposing the tenuous plants and saplings to salty air and water spray. Overcoming this challenge was crucial since his first smuggling of tea seeds to India had failed. To experiment, Fortune brought along a wondrous device, the Wardian case.
Having procured some fine mulberry plants, I planted them in a Ward's case in the usual way and watered them well.
Invented in the 1830s by Dr. Nathaniel Bagshaw Ward of London, the Ward's case was groundbreaking in the world of botany.
In 2 or 3 days, when the soil was sufficiently dry, a large quantity of tea seeds were scattered over its surface and covered with the earth about ½ an inch deep. The whole case was now sprinkled with water and fastened down with a few crossbars to keep the earth in its place. Dr. Falconer in Calcutta wrote to me upon the receipt of this case. The young tea plants were sprouting around the mulberries as thick as they could come up.
With this proven success, Fortune hired Chinese craftsmen to build more Ward's cases. And he was set.
As a result of this mission, nearly 20,000 plants from the best black and green tea regions of central China have been introduced to the Himalayas. Every seed seemed to have grown. No fewer than 12,838 plants were added to the Himalayan plantations, and many more were germinating. 6 first-rate manufacturers, 2 leadmen, and a large supply of implements were also brought and safely located on the government plantations.
By mid-April of 1851, Fortune's tea raid came to a flourishing finish in the Himalayas. The company requested Fortune to advise on tea cultivation throughout India.
The new China plants ought to be carefully propagated and distributed all over the plantations, and more of these fine varieties might be yearly imported from China.
England's tea experiment in India was now planted on solid ground. And yet, something was still missing. Less than 24 months later, the company hired Fortune again. The target? The crown jewel of tea.
In the end of 1852, I was deputed a second time by the East India Company for procuring some first-rate black tea makers. I sailed from the town of Ming Dynasty. On my arrival, I started immediately for the tea districts in the interior.
The super tea raider moved at warp speed.
Everything was according to my wishes. A large number of Ward's cases were now ready.
Fortune mobilized his far-flung network of local influencers to poach black tea masters.
8 men, natives of Fukien, well acquainted with the method of making the finest teas of the great Wuyi Mountains, as well as those from Kiangsi, were shipped in the steamer Chuson for Calcutta. They all arrived in safety in the Himalayas on the 10th of August, 1855. No fewer than 23,892 tea plants now growing on the Himalayas.
With an abundance of the finest Chinese tea plants, seeds, and first-rate tea makers for black, green, and oolong teas, British India began commercial tea cultivation in 1856. In just 6 years, Robert Fortune transplanted tea, China's national treasure and industry, across the ocean to India. The Himalayan plantation became the world-renowned tea district, Darjeeling. The Indian tea industry flourished. By the late 1930s, India became the world's #1 tea exporter, producing an average of 332 million pounds or 150,000 metric tons per year.
有了正山小种的红茶，才有世界上其他的红茶，包括世界上的阿萨姆的、印度的大吉利等等。
The colonial tea branches grew from India to British Ceylon, now Sri Lanka. Tea cultivation began in 1867, after James Taylor visited India to learn the tea trade. Together with Thomas Lipton, they expanded the tea industry. By the late 1930s, Sri Lanka became the world's #2 exporter, supplying an annual average of 220 million pounds or 100,000 metric tons of tea. In Africa, the British started commercial tea cultivation in Kenya in 1924. The country has become a major producer of black tea. Empire tea, grown throughout her vast colonies, was a dream come true for Great Britain. Drink 5 cups a day. Tea parties for any age. Today, around the world, tea is the most popular drink after water. Evolved and beloved, tea lives amongst us.
There's something about tea that makes you more human. It's the cup of humanity. And all of us who are in the world of tea and who love tea, we talk about tea as a way. The Tao of tea is.
我这一生的梦想非常简单，我的祖先做了300多年的茶，我是让我的后人这样再做几百年。 这就是我一生的梦想要做的事情。
武夷茶文化影响了我们世界的格局。
用心做好这一杯茶，这一杯茶充满了爱，充满了希望，充满了和平。
珍惜每一杯茶，珍惜每一口茶。
Camellia sinensis. This is the drink of humanity. Tea, the essence of heaven and earth. The elixir for the human soul. This rooted one, humble, noble, spiritual, infuses herself into the human spirit. transforming into a simple drink, connecting us, energizing us, flowing through borders, cultures, and religions. For all the tea in the world, Wuyishan, she is the heart of tea.
茶乃天地之精华。
立成叔叔。Boom, boom, boba. Iron Buddha. Jasmine, fair maidens. Golden monkey. Afternoon tea. Wuyi茶。洞顶乌龙。功夫茶。请喝茶。